true review of the review. As we convene this hearing, the committee down the hall, the Foreign Affairs Committee, has authored significant reforms in the form of legislation. Part of what we will do here today is to continue fueling the discovery process for that purpose. In preparation for today's hearing, the staff has prepared approximately a 100-page report, which is entitled Benghazi Attacks, Investigative Update, Interim Report on the Accountability Review Board.
So let me respond as direct as I can. Based on all of the evidence obtained by this committee, this Benghazi review was one of the most comprehensive ARB reviews ever conducted. And Admiral Mullen an opportunity to respond directly to these unsubstantiated accusations.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you will give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
We determined, as stated in the board's report, quote, that responsibility for the tragic loss of life, injuries, and damage to U.S. facilities and property rests solely and completely with the terrorists who perpetrated the attack.
The board recognizes that poor performance does not ordinarily constitute a breach of duty that would serve as a basis for disciplinary action, but instead needs to be addressed by the performance management system of the State Department. However, the board is of the view that findings of unsatisfactory leadership performance by senior officials in the case of Benghazi should be a potential basis for discipline recommendations by future ARBs.
Before addressing the subject of this hearing, both my wife, Deborah, who is here with me today, and I want to express our deepest sympathies to the families of those killed in the tragedy earlier this week. As a Navy family ourselves, those lost were our shipmates and family members in the truest sense of the word, and their dedication, service to our country, and sacrifice will never be forgotten. And Chairman Issa and Ranking Member Cummings and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. And I hope my testimony will be helpful to the committee as it investigates the tragic events that occurred in Benghazi, Libya on September 11th and 12th, 2012.
President Obama. As director, I learned and understood the importance of having clear lines of authority and an organizational structure concerning security matters.
You talked about conflicts. Isn't it true that there were no true outsiders? There were no advocates for the families. There were no people whose service outside of government could have caused them to be skeptical. But in fact, each of you, and Ambassador, you said you had no conflict. Well, at the same time, you talked about 42 years in the organization you were overseeing. If we looked at the bank failures of 2007 and brought Jamie Dimon in to head the board, some might say that there was an inherent conflict because of his experience in life.
Surprised or shocked that he or any of these other three people, the top four that have been removed, that no one was fired?
We've talked about the constraints of the law.
Isn't it true in the military you'd get an adverse OER, you'd never be promoted again in all likelihood, and your career would be over, and on an upper route basis you have a limited time before you're going to be forced out, and if you're a second, first lieutenant, you're going to be forced out before you're eligible for retirement. So in the military, isn't there a level of ultimate accountability in which your career is over and you know it at that moment?
I absolutely, and I'd let Ambassador Pickering speak to how that works in the State Department.
I think there's an exact parallel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Mullen, in your testimony, your written testimony today, fourth paragraph, you say, we operated independently and were given freedom to pursue the investigation as we deemed necessary. In your interview with the committee staff, transcribed interview, the committee asked you, the ARB is supposed to be set up as an independent review board. Did you have any questions about the independence of the board? Your response, from my perspective, the most important descriptive characteristic of it was that it would be independent. that all accurate?
Correct.
Okay. In that same interview with committee staff, you were asked, did you update the State Department in the course of the ARB? You replied, quote, shortly after we interviewed Ms. Lamb, Charlene Lamb, I initiated a call to Ms. Mills to give her a heads up because at this point, Ms. Lamb was on the list to come over here to testify. Now, is the over here to testify, is that in reference to when Ms. Lamb testified in front of this committee?
In October.
In October?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And this Ms. Mills you refer to here, is this the same Ms. Mills who is Cheryl Mills, Chief of Staff and Counselor to the Secretary of State?
It is.
All right, and this is the same Ms. Mills that Greg Hicks testified when he was in front of the committee last spring, that when she calls, you take her call. It's a call you don't always want to get, but it's one you always take. That's the same Cheryl Mills we're talking about?
Except that that's what you say he's...
Later in that same response to the committee's question about you updating the State Department in the course of the ARB, you said this. So essentially, I gave Ms. Mills, Cheryl Mills, Chief of Staff, Counselor to the Secretary of State, a heads up. I thought that her appearance, Charlene Lamb, could be a very difficult appearance for the State Department.
Correct.
Now here's what I'm wondering. My guess is a lot of people are wondering. If this is so independent, why are you giving the State Department a heads up about a witness coming in front of this committee?
We had just completed, within a day or two of that phone call,
Wait, so you had a phone call with Ms. Mills?
Yeah.
That we're talking
yes, I mean, I think that's what my statement said.
Okay.
But no, we had just completed the interview with Ms. Lamb, and as someone who...
Well, that raises an important question.
Can I answer your question?
Yes, you can.
So, someone having run a department and spent many, many times trying as a leader of a department to...
Let me ask you, my time is winding down fast. Let me ask you this, Admiral.
Let me answer this, would you please?
Well, let me ask you this, because this is important. The ARB was formed on October 3rd, correct?
Correct.
All right. Charlene Lamb came in front of this committee October 10th.
Correct.
7 days later.
Right.
So why was she one of the first people you interviewed? Why not?
She was one of the first people interviewed because she was in control of diplomatic security decisions.
How did you know she was on the list? Who told you she was testifying in front of Congress?
It was public knowledge that she was.
That's usually not made public till a few days before.
Well, by the time I knew it.
So what day did you interview Charlene Lamb? Do you know?
Between the 3rd and the 10th.
Okay, and then when did you talk to Cheryl Mills? Right after that?
No, not right after that. I'd say within 24 hours. And specifically to give her a heads up that I didn't think that Charlene Lamb would be a witness at that point in time that would represent the department well. Specific, and I had run a department, worked a lot.
Yeah, but again,
worked a lot historically.
We've been told that the ARB is an independent review. In fact, you said it. You've said it twice. You said it in front of the committee staff. You said it in your statement today.
Correct.
And yet, within a week, you're giving the counselor to the Secretary of State a heads up about a witness who you think is not going to be a good witness when it comes in front of the committee to investigate. You know what else happened between October 3rd and October 10th? Congressman Chaffetz, sitting in the chair, went to Libya, and on that trip for the first time under what Greg Hicks testified in front of this committee last spring, State Department, Cheryl Mills sent a staff lawyer on that trip, and Greg Hicks testified first time in all his years in diplomatic service where that lawyer was instructed to be in every single meeting Jason Chaffetz had with Greg Hicks. That also happened. Did you and Cheryl Mills talk about that?
No.
That also happened. And Greg Hicks also testified that when there was a meeting at a classified level that this staff lawyer was not eligible to attend, he got a phone call quickly thereafter from Cheryl Mills saying, why in the world did you let this meeting take place where this lawyer couldn't be in that meeting? And this is the same Cheryl Mills in that same time frame you're given a heads up to, and yet we're supposed to believe this report is independent.
I actually rest very comfortable it is independent.
Let me ask you one last question because my time is out. Did Cheryl Mills, two last questions if I could, Mr. Chairman. Did Cheryl Mills get to see this report before it went public?
We had a draft report when it was wrapped up. We specifically briefed the Secretary of State for a couple of hours, and Ms. Mills was in.
So both Cheryl Mills and Hillary Clinton got to see this report before it went public?
It was submitted. The report was submitted to her the Secretary of State made a decision.
So before December
to
18th,
release
they
it.
both got to see it. If I could, one last question. Let me just ask this, Admiral Mullen. So if an Inspector General, if you learned that an Inspector General in the course of an investigation informed its agency leadership that a witness scheduled to testify before Congress would reflect poorly on the agency, would you have concerns about an Inspector General doing the same thing you did?
The intent of
No, that's yes or no. If an Inspector General did what you guys did, would you have concerns about that?
The intent of what I did was to give the leadership in the State Department a heads up with respect to Ms.
You gave not only
Mr.
gave him
Chairman.
the heads up, you let him see the final product before the public.
Then certainly there's more we can do if we give you greater authority. I wanted to follow up Secretary Kennedy on some of Senator Johnson's questions. Here's what's bothering me about the attack on our consulate and the prior cable. So I also serve on the Senate Armed Services Committee, and in February of 2000 of this past year, General Dempsey as well as Secretary Panetta testified about the attack on the consulate in Benghazi before that committee, and both of them testified that they were aware of the prior cables, particularly the cable of August 16th coming from Ambassador Stevens, which described the concerns about the adequacy of the security at the consulate in Benghazi. I believe you've testified that you were familiar with that cable. Is that right?
That is correct.
They said they received that information from a report from General Ham that went up to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and then also went to the Secretary of Defense as well. And as a result of that, in fact, General Ham approached, according to the testimony before the Armed Services Committee, actually approached the State Department asking whether the site security team from Tripoli should be extended in Benghazi. And according to the testimony before the Armed Services Committee of General Dempsey, he was told no. Are you familiar with that testimony?
My recollection was, and I just read it, I believe, I thought it was that General Ham approached Ambassador Stevens about whether the SST should be extended in Tripoli. That's my recollection, but I would need to refresh myself by looking at the papers before.
Okay, they had called the embassy. It's not clear who they spoke to, according to the testimony, and they were told no. I guess the question, according to the testimony before the Armed Services Committee, it's not clear who said no for the extension of site security team. Do you know that?
What I'm aware of, Senator, is that there were 16 people on the SST. 8 security people, 2 medical, 2 communications, 2 helicopter landing zone people, 2 EOD, that's 8, and then 8 security. That latter 8 had worked themselves out of a job because the State Department had replaced them. The 8 who were security had been replaced by a combination of State Department personnel, and if I make it clear, 6 of those 8 stayed on in Tripoli, which is not
right.
required.
But my question, just so I'm clear, I just want to understand.
Yes.
There was General Ham knew about this, reported it up his chain of command, and do you know? He said that according to Dempsey, Ham called the embassy and said, because of obviously the cable receipt, and said, do you want to extend the site security team? Were you aware of that, and who made the decision there?
I was not aware. No, I was not aware that General Ham had contacted the embassy.
Well, let me.
I don't know who.
Well, I'll give you a copy of that testimony because I will have a follow-up question. Here's my question to you: what troubled me was that if General Ham, the commander of AFRICOM, reported up his chain of command a cable from the State Department about security, involving security and other issues in Benghazi, and that went to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, went to the Secretary of Defense, how is it that you, with your responsibility, given that this was a State Department, obviously our ambassador and the personnel, there were State Department personnel here, would not have reported that up your chain of command?
Because we had replaced those individuals with State Department personnel, and six
you
of
received-
them six of them had remained.
It was important enough for the AFRICOM general on the ground, who it wasn't his area of responsibility, it wasn't a DOD facility, that they thought a Secretary of State, a state cable should be reported up to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, reported up to the Secretary of Defense, and even though State Department personnel were involved, you did not report it to the Secretary of State?
Because we had replaced those individuals.
But that cable said that security was not adequate there from your ambassador. You didn't think that was important enough to report to the Secretary of State?
Because we were repairing or fixing the shortfalls that were outlined.
I just am shocked that the general in AFRICOM thought it was important enough to report it up his chain of command, even though it didn't involve his personnel directly, and you did not.
But again, Senator, two things. One, we are talking about Tripoli, not Benghazi. The tragedy took place in Benghazi. The SST was a Tripoli-based unit, so they're two separate things.
Okay, well, my time is up, but the August cable clearly involved Benghazi, not Tripoli.
No question, but there was no offer. There was no offer or request from the post to keep the SST and shift them to Benghazi.
But we're talking about reporting up on a cable on the security of State Department personnel, so that's my issue with it, but my time is up, and I appreciate your being here.
Because of sequestration, not because we cut your money, but because based on a risk assessment, you decided, we're going to have to pay off the bad guys to do this, or there's no way they can sustain this, or this is a bad idea because, a water park in Iraq, which is now crumbling, and, or the power grid in an area that's going to get blown up. I need some success stories here. I need you to tell me some places you've done that. And I will promise you this. If you can bring me some success stories where you've cut off projects because you've appropriately evaluated both risk and sustainability, I will make you the stars of my website for as long as you want to be up there. I will herald you, and I will actually send you balloon bouquets. They won't drop from the ceiling. But that's what we're looking for here. We're looking for a sense that all of this work is resulting in a change of culture. And if we don't get that change of culture, I got to tell you guys, you're going to be here every 6 months until Missourians kick me out of this place. Or I decide I've had enough. And at this point, I'm not sure which is going to come first. What is...
Benghazi was at a threat level that we should have reprioritized what we were doing within our existing capabilities. I thank the chairman for introducing this legislation. In the long term, it will help us on a number of different fronts. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the tragedy in Benghazi could have been avoided had we had this legislation. I think that was a question that we did not understand the situation that we were in, and perhaps we should have had more resources, or we should have made a decision to evacuate that post earlier. But we very much appreciate this legislation. It will help us in many, many ways. It will strengthen our capability to stay in places where the threats are greater. But I'm not going to blame Benghazi on the lack of this legislation.
Do you have anything to add? Benghazi was a particular situation there, given the makeup of the government and the situation, just the newness of all this. What lessons have we learned from that can be applied elsewhere in terms of our relationship with the host nation? Host nation didn't even know this facility was there, I understand, or they weren't informed of it. What protocols have we put in place, if any, after that to make sure we have better cooperation with the host nation in terms of security needs?
One of the chief issues I think that we have realized and was addressed in the ARB was the fact that all of our facilities should meet OSPB standards, Overseas Security Policy Board standards for physical security. In this instance, and I wasn't in a position to know why, but in this instance, they were not met. There were no waivers that were granted. That has been rectified. We will not have a temporary facility that has not been signed off on at the highest levels, wherein a balance of our national security interest and the diplomatic imperatives are weighed against the security threat. So I would say that is one positive outcome of the ARB.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Flake. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to our witnesses. Appreciate you being here today. My first hearing as a senator was the hearing with Secretary Clinton to talk about the Benghazi incident and the ARB recommendations, and it was a very memorable one. I'll never forget that first hearing.
With all due respect, the fact is we had 4 dead Americans. Was it because of a protest, or was it because of guys out for a walk one night who decided they'd go kill some Americans? What difference at this point does it make?